Hello and welcome, brothers and sisters, to this week's message. From Adam, to me, to you. From the very first games, posters have been used to give a glimpse into the past. Faded colors and smiles selling products that have long since wasted away, or relics of a government that plunged the world into holy division. This video, I want to focus on the pre-war propaganda posters found throughout the series, examine their use in game, possible real-world inspirations, and other interesting related lore. For the purpose of this video, I am defining propaganda as information used to promote or publicize a particular political cause or point of view. This working definition is simply to organize and select a portion of the vast collection of posters that can be found in the games. This video is focusing on the pre-war propaganda posters. I will have to have a whole other video dedicated to post-war propaganda and the many advertisements. So turn up the rads, lasses and lads, and let's dive into the pre-war propaganda. Let's start this off with a banger, and first look at the Fallout 3 exclusive that we will refer to as the Duck and Cover poster. It shows a cartoon turtle encountering a bomb that is about to detonate, so it makes the wise decision to hide itself inside the shell to shield it from the blast. The text reads fairly clearly, "Kids, learn to find shelter." And the top right has the logo for the Civil Defense Administration. And we'll talk more about them a little later, but the focus of this group was on preparing the country for a possible nuclear exchange and providing information to the public as how best to survive. This poster is obviously targeting a younger audience and can be found in places like the Springvale Elementary School. This poster is great because it is a very direct reference to a real-life video released in 1952 by the real-world Civil Defense Administration. The short film has an intro with Bert the Turtle, who is seen being wary and cautious, and at the first sign of trouble, ducks and covers by hiding in his shell. The poster in Fallout is a very close approximation of the Duck and Cover theatrical release poster, showing Bert seeing a bomb and then hiding in his shell as it detonates. There are only small superficial differences between the real poster and in-game poster, making the connection extremely obvious. But it isn't known if this safety campaign in Fallout is limited to just posters, or if there was an associated movie just like in real life. The second poster is also created by the Civil Defense Administration and is fairly commonly found in Fallout 3 and Fallout 4. It shows a man in a hard hat and yellow coat holding a shovel, pointing at you, the viewer, and asking, "Where will you be when the Holocaust comes?" In the background is a mushroom cloud and a destroyed car showing off the upcoming nuclear holocaust that the poster is warning about. This poster is directly inspired by a real-life Federal Civil Defense Authority poster, shown here, featuring a man with a hard hat, a yellow coat, all the while carrying a shovel. Rather than pointing at the viewer, he is pointing at something off in the distance, and the text reads, "Serving you in time of emergency." And in the background are some destroyed buildings and what looks like survivors of a flood trying to get somewhere on a boat. There are other posters from the Civil Defense Authority that do warn of radioactive fallout with a looming mushroom cloud. So it seems that elements from each of these posters were kind of combined into the one we find in Fallout. In the Fallout poster, displayed prominently is the group responsible for the poster, the Civil Defense Administration, with an orange and black logo sporting a C and a D. What is interesting about this, though, is that the in-game Civil Defense Administration seems to combine two separate real-life groups into one. The real-world Civil Defense Administration was first organized in 1950, which focused on creating and communicating strategies to mitigate nuclear crises. This was the group that created Duck and Cover with Bert the Turtle that inspired the previous poster that we looked at. This organization was disbanded, however, in 1958. A completely separate organization called the Federal Civil Defense Authority was created in 1972, who functioned in a similar role, directing defense programs like the creation of fallout shelters and warning systems. This is the group that made the posters with the man in a yellow coat, and this is their logo. It looks quite similar to the Civil Defense Authority, not the Civil Defense Administration that the group took its name after. And the Civil Defense Authority was also established in the 70s, whereas the Civil Defense Administration was created in the 50s, which is truer to the period that Fallout takes its aesthetic from. To make things just a little bit more confusing, the Civil Defense Authority that uses the CD logo borrowed it from a long-defunct agency called the Office of Civilian Defense that was set up in 1941 and disbanded in 1945 near the end of World War II. All of this means, to me at least, that these two separate entities existed as one in the Fallout universe, since they smashed together all these different aspects of these two groups that in real life were separated by a little over a decade. So this will be a pretty quick one, but the first Fallout's only contribution to this list is only when loading the game, as it has a chance to appear on the screen before the introduction video. It is the exact painting done by N.C. Wyeth and released in 1942 to help promote the buying of war bonds to help the American war effort. While we're on the subject of Uncle Sam, Fallout 2 has a handful of pre-war propaganda posters that show up very briefly that also feature good old Uncle Sam. This is a 1942 Navy recruitment poster with a contemplative Uncle Sam and the word "think" in bold text and a message admonishing workers to not slack off in producing for the war effort. This was also created in 1942 by Charles R. Chickering and is only seen partly in the Fallout 2 introduction video. On the opposite side of the think poster is another Uncle Sam poster, which tells viewers to defend your country by enlisting in the US Army. Uncle Sam can be seen rolling up his sleeves, ready to rumble, and this poster was created in our world in 1943 as part of the World War II recruitment efforts. Surprisingly, the only time Uncle Sam shows up in later Fallout games is in a poster that can be found in both Fallout 3 and Fallout 4, shown here. There are actually two versions of this poster, a conventional portrait poster layout and a longer landscape version for display on a billboard. They both have the same information though, with text that says, "Lend a hand for Uncle Sam. Enlist today." But there are some worthwhile observations here. There are no similar real-world posters. In fact, it is very difficult to find any real-world poster that shows Uncle Sam so beaten down and vulnerable. He is shown as strong, brave, maybe a little bruised, but always determined and never backing down. He is often seen asking for help, usually calling for people to enlist, to contribute scrap, or support the war effort in some other way. Now there are a few things to note. The flag in the background is the conventional 50-star flag that we are used to, but the flag design had changed in the Fallout world to a 13-star version in 1969, and at some point changed to a 14-star design before the Great War. The 50-star flag is seen in other parts of the game where one might expect to see the 13 or 14-star variant. So it isn't clear what the significance of opting for the old 50-star design is over the newer designs that would be flying on every flagpole in America. The last interesting note is that the billboard poster has the logo for the Civil Defense Administration, which is quite strange to have on an enlistment poster. Usually whatever branch of the military commissioned the artwork would be listed as the responsible party, but the Civil Defense Administration, apparently, also had military enlistment as part of their responsibilities, in addition to governing how best to prepare, warn, and help the populace in the event of a nuclear disaster. Let's shift gears and look at some posters in Fallout 4, where there are a number of posters that are not specifically targeting China, rather they put the screws to communism itself. This poster can be seen fairly commonly and shows several finned bombs or squatty missiles falling down with a skull on the nose and a yellow star as seen on the Chinese flag. The text at the bottom reads, "Beware the Red Death," and no, this is not a reference to the DC villain of the same name. This kind of poster is quite unique, and there isn't a great real-world reference for it, but most propaganda posters related to bombs had to do with the World War II strategic bombing campaign so they were always portrayed as favorable toward the US war effort. Another poster with a similar red, black, and white color scheme portrays a large black spider with a skull on its abdomen slowly lowering itself and the words, "Be vigilant, communism is coming." Spiders have been used many times in propaganda art to portray an enemy that is calculating and tricky, having methodically laid a large web to trap any unsuspecting victims. There is an old Nazi-era propaganda piece that portrays the Bolsheviks as a large red spider with a skull head and a helmet. While not exactly the same, the imagery is there. A spider, a skull, with a red star prominently displayed on the forehead, all meant to represent communism. Another poster that is obviously from this series due to similar colors and design is, in my opinion at least, the most creepy of them all. An octopus is partially hidden behind an opening door. A skull and unblinking eye can be seen, partially exposed, with a recognizable star on his forehead. The tentacles are reaching in every direction, and the text at the bottom reads, "Communism is at your door." While again not being directly inspired by any single work of art, an octopus is another animal that has been used often to portray enemies in propaganda. The first art to associate communism with an octopus was a French poster urging action against the creeping effects of communism from Soviet Russia in the early 19th century. The Soviet Union would be portrayed as a red octopus in several Western-made pamphlets made by groups like the Catholic Library Service and Economic League. The last of the anti-communism art is a billboard that can be seen in several places, showing cars stopped on the road in what seems to be bumper-to-bumper traffic, with a red devil wearing a Chinese military cap. The sign says, "Spotted a commie? Call 1-800-REPORT-RED." Again, this is not reminiscent of any real-world art, but directly portraying communists or communism as a devil in artwork appears to be a more recent trend, mostly on the covers of books that speak critically of communism. The phone number shown in-game is a real phone number, but I wouldn't recommend calling it because it is the phone number for some sort of resort in Colorado, and I'm sure they'd be super confused if people started calling and reporting communist sightings. Let's round out the last of the posters seen in Fallout 2. Once again, these are all seen in the introduction videos. A poster showing a sailor hoisting and moving some large munitions is shown with the words, "Help deliver the goods, do it now," and can be seen near a projector screen. This is one of the oldest of all the posters, having been made by Herbert Poss in 1917. So while all of these Fallout and Fallout 2 posters have been World War II era, this one is from World War I. A rather simple poster is on the other side of the projector, showing some soldiers bearing the American flag and another obscured flag that appears to be the seal of the United States. The text says U.S. Army and Guardians of the Colors and was created by Tom Woodburn in 1940. Lastly is a much different kind of poster that is seen in the intro while the credits are showing, with a destroyed house and car with the words, "It can happen here unless we keep them firing." The implication here is that if we don't supply our troops with the needed resources, that America's enemies in World War II would bring the fight to North America. This poster was created by the Office for Emergency Management in 1942, and that short-lived organization was somewhat similar to the Civil Defense Administration that we talked about earlier and would appear in the 1950s. The only thing I want to point out with these Fallout and Fallout 2 posters is the fact that they are all one-for-one matches of art from World War II and World War I. Such posters would seem somewhat out of place in the 2270s, but make the most sense as set pieces that are meant to communicate the general period of time that the pre-war was emulating. First showing up in Fallout 4, and definitely the most adorable of all posters that we will see here, is the Mr. Pebbles poster. Who said propaganda couldn't be cute? We see a white cat in a spacesuit standing at a podium as if he's about to give a speech or answer questions with an American flag in the background. At the bottom it tells us that the cat is named Mr. Pebbles and that he was the first cat in space. Now I like cats just about as much as anyone, but still, why would the pre-war world make a big deal out of the first cat in space? Do they also have posters for the first dog? For the first ape? Well, in Fallout 76, we get some information that gives us context to this poster. An NPC in Fallout 76 by the name of Catherine Swan tells the player character that the first organism in space was a Persian house cat named Mr. Pebbles. Haha. So Mr. Pebbles wasn't just the first cat in space, but the first organism in space at all. This has some very interesting implications and raises a few questions as well. The claim to be the first organism in space isn't expounded on, because if we are getting really technical, which we love to do here, the first recognized organism purposefully launched into space were a bunch of fruit flies by the US in 1947 using a modified V-2 rocket. The rocket achieved a height of 68 miles or 109 kilometers, which passed the internationally recognized boundary for space, which is at 100 kilometers. However, the more well-known animals to be launched into space may not have been the first true animal in space, but they were firsts in other ways. Like the first animals to orbit the Earth, which was a Soviet Sputnik 5 mission that launched 2 dogs, Belka and Strelka, along with a rabbit, a bunch of mice, rats, fruit flies, and plants. So we can interpret Mr. Pebbles' first in-space claim in a few ways. The first is that he really is the first organism in space, and the space race timeline is significantly different from our real world. The second is that he's not the first in space, but rather can claim a different kind of first, like the first to orbit the Earth and return successfully, and therefore considered the first in that respect. And in this scenario, the early space race could more or less be the same as our world. There is the third option though, that this is not entirely honest and is just a false portrayal of a real world event. But even if it is a giant lie, it's a cute lie, so we can give it a pass. In Fallout 3 and Fallout 4, there is a poster that is fairly common to find that shows a power-armored soldier holding an extremely long American flag, sporting the new 13-star flag redesign. I have played through Fallout 3 and 4 an obscene number of times and seen this poster often, as I'm sure many of you have, and I never realized that the soldier is standing on a pile of dead Chinese soldiers. It is easier to see in the poster that doesn't have faded colors and is not deteriorated, but I always thought he was just standing on some destroyed battlefield. The text on the poster says, "Courage today, victory tomorrow." And I was surprised to come up empty when looking at real-world examples that this may have taken inspiration from. Both the text and the image do not bear any strong resemblance to anything else. Although, yeah, generally speaking, there are calls for courage in propaganda posters, and proudly displaying the flag is also super common. Another poster that first debuted in Fallout 3 but can also be found in Fallout 4 shows a lifelike Statue of Liberty pointing at the viewer with the text, "Support our troops, buy war bonds today." There isn't a whole lot to this poster, but there is a poster that I think could have been the inspiration. A 1917 poster created by Charles Macaulay that shows a lifelike Statue of Liberty pointing at the viewer with the text reading, "You buy a Liberty bond, lest I perish." So although there are differences in how Lady Liberty is portrayed and the exact verbiage that is used, they both have a more real-life Statue of Liberty pointing at the viewer, admonishing us to buy bonds. I do think it's interesting though the difference in demeanor between the two ladies. In Fallout, she looks happy, friendly, and inviting you to get war bonds. In the real-world poster, she's serious, with almost a scowl, and buying bonds seems almost more like a command than an invitation. Fallout 4 gives us a poster of a very happy man in a suit of power armor, holding his helmet in one hand, flashing a nice smile, while giving us a big thumbs up. In the background is the new flag design and other power armor-clad individuals standing at attention. The text reads, "Your country needs you, enlist." The visuals are definitely unique. In fact, a soldier with such a happy smile and giving a thumbs up is not a common decision in war propaganda art, although maybe it's more appropriate in the Fallout world, whose icon, the Vault Boy, is always seen smiling, winking, and giving a thumbs up to everyone, everywhere, at all times. The text, though, is well known, as it was first popularized by the iconic poster by Alfred Leet in 1914. You'll know it when you see it, but this poster features Lord Horatio Kitchener. Wow, what an English name. Who was a field marshal in the British Army during World War I. This is certainly where the text comes from, even if the image is different. But there is one other detail to note about the Fallout poster, which has to do with the power armor. At a quick glance, it seems to pass for a set of T-60, which makes sense because Fallout 4 introduced T-60 to the world, but the more you look at it, the more you realize that it is definitely not a complete copy of the T-60. The pauldrons, the helmet, and the chest portion are all either subtly or drastically different, and it's hard to know if the artists at Bethesda threw this together before the T-60 design was finalized, or if they just took artistic liberties when drawing it up. Additionally, the helmets behind the central figure don't look like any power armor in Fallout 4, since they all seem to have two helmet-mounted lights. Fallout 76 gives us a poster featuring a soldier in T-51 with an American flag in the background and vertibirds flying overhead. The text reads, "For Anchorage, for America, for democracy." There are no known posters with a remarkably similar message or image, although there is a precedence for propaganda messages to remind or admonish people to do what they can to protect American democracy. The Chinese invasion of Anchorage also appears to function similar to Pearl Harbor in World War II, where it came to be a rallying cry for the American war effort. Fallout 3 gives us not only American propaganda, but even goes as far as giving us Chinese propaganda. Operation Anchorage gives us a glimpse at two possible posters that we can encounter while in the simulation. The first shows several Chinese soldiers in a snowy environment, one of which is notably armed with a Gauss rifle, with a large sun in the background, and the unique Chinese bomber that we see in the simulation as well. At the bottom is text that translates to, "Long live the Chinese People's Liberation Army," which I'm just going to shorten to PLA. I was unable to find any such real-life Chinese posters with very similar imagery or even text, and after speaking with a Chinese consultant and friend, the text isn't too out of the norm. Although these kinds of propaganda posters generally had messages of protecting your land/country or fighting for the people. Before I look at it any further though, I think it's worth looking at the other poster that can be found. This one shows the same color palette, using only blacks, whites, and reds with the same exact text written at the bottom. This one only features one Chinese soldier in a wintry background carrying a rifle that I don't recognize, and this poster seems to have a connection to a prolific real-life PLA soldier. Lei Feng was a PLA soldier that became an icon for his loyalty to the Communist Party and China as a whole, although he died at quite a young age at 21. His likeness was used in many posters, and the Ushanka-looking hat that he is often portrayed with has come to be known as the Lei Feng hat in China. The Fallout poster looks like aspects of different Lei Feng posters, complete with his famous hat. The style of these two posters seem consistent with posters that were made in 1967 and 1968 during the Cultural Revolution. While many of these posters feature Mao Zedong, which the Fallout posters lack, the art style, the reliance on black, white, and red colors, and the large text at the bottom of the picture are pretty spot on. So it seems these Fallout propaganda posters take after the late 60s Cultural Revolution posters, with the poster depicting a lone soldier from the Lei Feng posters. I also think it is worth pointing out the use of the Gauss rifle by a Chinese soldier, which we don't actually see in Operation Anchorage. They only ever use sniper rifles, and it would seem to imply that it is of Chinese origin, but since the simulation is an unreliable source of information, we can't say anything for certain. Fallout 3 gives us one more Chinese-themed poster, but this one is much less flattering than the previous because it was made by the US government and not the Chinese. This is actually not ever seen as a poster, and instead as a large billboard, and boy is this scary. We see a large Chinese monster, goblin, demon thing picking up a panicked civilian while others flee on a backdrop of a destroyed city. At the bottom the text reads, "Stop the Red Menace. Enlist." While there is not a poster I could find that bore a strong resemblance to this one, portraying the enemy as monstrous and non-human is a tale as old as time, but there are some aspects of how the Chinese monster is portrayed that is similar to World War II anti-Japanese propaganda made by the US. There are some pretty racist stereotypes that are portrayed in these posters, which isn't cool, but we are going to look at them with an analytical eye to see if there are strong similarities. There were a handful of posters that were made that portrayed Japanese soldiers and leaders with long, sharp nails, almost claw-like, in order to make them look more menacing. The same was done in the Fallout poster in a very similar manner. The teeth in the Fallout poster are also large, prominent, and sharp, which seems to be slightly reminiscent of caricatures like Tokyo Kid and Tojo, who were well-known characters in anti-Japanese propaganda and cartoons, although the Fallout poster is not nearly as exaggerated as them. This picture of Tojo here is the most similar of any poster I could find, but I think the Fallout poster is just a combination of a lot of elements seen in World War II anti-Japanese artwork. Another series of posters was introduced in Fallout 4 with some common and not so common refrains. The first one that has well-established historical precedence is a fairly simple design, a large red ear on a red background with the text, "The walls have ears, communism is listening." There are many real-world posters that warn people against divulging sensitive information, especially during World War II, and they all say things along similar lines. However, this poster uses the exact phrase, "The walls have ears," along with a sinking ship, the unfortunate consequence of someone saying something out loud that they shouldn't have. Although I couldn't find any examples of a poster with just an ear, there are some that have an ear as part of the artwork, and a well-known poster communicated this idea with the phrase, "Loose lips sink ships." Less common than the walls have ears theme is the next poster, which has a giant menacing eye and the text, "The walls have eyes, communism is watching." I couldn't find anything that bore a strong resemblance to this poster, but during World War II, there were some posters that conveyed a similar idea. One well-known example created by Glenn Groh during World War II depicts a German soldier in the iconic Stahlhelm helmet and observant eyes, with the text, "He's watching you." These posters, with similar themes but very different visual representation, are the closest real-world examples. The last poster of this series, that all share a very similar design and color palette, is a bit different. This one shows towering robots, emblazoned with the Chinese star, and prop planes flying above. The text reads, "Their war machine is mobilizing. Let's prepare ours." There are a number of interesting aspects of this poster. The first is the reference to preparing the war machine, which seems to be symbolized by a giant war-waging robot. Liberty Prime was under development in the pre-war, and although his presence doesn't seem to have been common knowledge, the last line of "Let's prepare ours," along with the imagery of giant robots, seems too on the nose to just be alluding to the abstract concept of a war machine. If this really is a subtle reference to Liberty Prime, it might display fears of a similar Chinese project, and there might have been a sense of urgency that the United States needed to beat the Chinese to this incredible weapon, similar to the race for the atomic bomb in World War II. It is also interesting to note that the robots with the large Chinese star on the chest and 3 eyes is portrayed in Fallout 76. There is a paint job called the Red Shift paint job that can turn any set of power armor into a Chinese version of power armor. Notably, this power armor has 3 glowing eyes and a large red star on the chest, exactly as it is portrayed in this poster. Is this a subtle nod to the Fallout 4 poster, or is Bethesda hinting at something? Fallout 4 really leaned into the aesthetic of the American Revolutionary War, particularly with the Minutemen faction. The Minutemen share their ideology that is focused on freedom and self-governance, will even dress in clothes that would be at home in the 1700s. They use laser muskets, and the only remaining Minutemen that can be found at the beginning of the game are in the Museum of Freedom, for Adam's sake. It should come as no surprise then that the Join or Die image that was created by Benjamin Franklin in the 1750s as a political cartoon is a common sight in the Commonwealth. It can be found in places that you wouldn't expect either, like the Red Rocket Station outside of Sanctuary. Whether this was put up by an eager and enthusiastic member of the Minutemen at some point, or the Commonwealth had a real fascination with the Revolutionary War time period, we can't really say for certain. The Join or Die imagery portrays a snake cut up into 8 parts, and they all represent American colonies. Kind of. New England represents the 4 northeast colonies, Delaware was a part of Pennsylvania, and Georgia was just excluded because apparently old Benny Boy had a beef with the Peach State. The idea was that unless they would unify and join together, they would not be able to realize their goals of independence. And this image would go on to represent the American struggle to become self-governing. The last group of posters are very interesting and are only found in Fallout 76. There's also some important context in order to understand these posters. All of them are similar, portraying a yellow 5-pointed star with a broken circular chain and messages about communism. The first poster even shows an American flag saying, "You're either with us or against us." Another says, "Only a communist spy turns his back on America," with the star and chain again, and the last one shows the same symbol, this time saying, "The gateway to communism." The red background and yellow star definitely gives the impression of China and or communism, but what's with the chain? Well, this is where we need some context because this is not actually a Chinese star. In the years before the Great War, a group of people in Appalachia became increasingly wary of the US government, and in particular, Project Safe House, which was the Vault-Tec-led effort to create vaults across the nation. This group of anarchists would grow as domestic and international tensions escalated, eventually leading to the outbreak of the Sino-American War. The Free Staters, as they came to be called, were prepping for disaster, buying ammunition, food, supplies, and building their own bunkers. They used a town called Harper's Ferry as their central location, and started to have increasingly violent run-ins with the locals, who were agitated by the impact the Free Staters were having on their tourist-dependent town. When things escalated to the point that brawls in the street were commonplace, the US government turned their attention to this group, who were being labeled as traitors due to their distrust of the government. The government began a propaganda campaign that resulted in the creation of these posters. They began confiscating Free State property and labeling their acts as sedition. The Free Staters retreated to their bunkers in September 2077 and formally declared their secession from the United States. Surprisingly, the US government did not want to engage with a well-supplied and entrenched insurgent force and began to wind down their operations against the group. The Free Staters were recognizable by a symbol and color combination, a 5-pointed star surrounded by a chain with a broken link, but with a black and blue color scheme. The color scheme is taken directly from the anarchist flag that represents individualist anarchism ideology. The broken chain likely alludes to the importance of strength among all members, as it takes just one weak link to break the chain, and the US government turns the Free State symbol into one resembling the Chinese star, associating the group of anarchists with communism. Associating non-communist groups with communism was a prominent tactic in the Second Red Scare that took off after World War II, where groups targeted as alleged communists were film industry professionals, academics, labor union activists, and homosexuals. Similar to the McCarthyist tactics employed in the 1950s, the pre-war US government is just blanket accusing or insinuating that the Free Staters are communists only because they disagree with the government itself. This is further evidence of the Red Scare kind of environment that was sweeping the US in the lead up to the Great War. That isn't quite the end of the Free State posters, however, because the Free Staters took it upon themselves to deface these propaganda posters. The first poster that said, "You're either with us or against us," was vandalized with the words, "Save yourself, war is coming." I presume that the graffiti is meaning a nuclear war, since the Sino-American War had been raging for some time at this point. The poster that said, "Only a communist spy turns his back on America," with the words, "Government lies," graffitied over the center, obviously showing how the government was being dishonest about the Free Staters by calling them communists, because to be a communist in the US at this time is almost the worst thing you could be. The last poster that said, "The gateway to communism," has the original text covered with the words, "Know the truth, be prepared," and "freedom." It is fascinating to see this propaganda war take place in the lead up to the Great War. as the government tried to turn public sentiment against the Free Staters by associating them with communism, and in return the Free Staters trying to expose the government for their perceived lies, which turned out to be true. Awkward. And those are the pre-war propaganda posters that we see in Fallout, their real-world inspirations, in-game lore, and any other interesting tidbits. I want to thank someone in my Discord server, which if you aren't a member of, what are you doing with your life, for being my China expert. Russ does a lot of art, and I especially enjoy his Fallout-themed and inspired Chinese propaganda posters, which is one of the most relevant plugs I've ever done. Check out his artwork in the link here or in the description, because he does a phenomenal job, and again, thank you. I also want to thank those that heed Adam's call to give extra support and build his kingdom. My patrons are incredible. I am so grateful for their contributions, and if you want to contribute and goof around in Fallout 76 with us, follow the links in my description. Adam bless you all. Please, take care of yourselves, and I will see you next week.